Hi, I'm Henry Herring, and thank you for watching this second episode in our series on the negative effects of marijuana use and the negative effects of marijuana legalization. In our first show, Dr. Lynn Fox and interviewer Mark Dell had an interesting and informative conversation about the dangers of marijuana use, especially on our developing youth. In this first episode, we sharpen our focus onto the problem of marijuana use and drug driving, that is, driving under the influence of marijuana. We'll talk with Dr. Philip Drum, who is a pharmacist, and he'll explain how marijuana affects the body in relation to operating a motor vehicle. As I explained in episode 1, I am a law enforcement officer with many years' experience dealing with people associated with the drug trade, including marijuana. I believe marijuana is a gateway drug that causes mental health issues, damages relationships, and causes problems across our nation. That's why I'm proud to be associated with CALM, Citizens Against Legalizing Marijuana. As California waits to vote on marijuana legalization this November, we continue efforts to inform the public about the negative consequences of this bill. We can see these consequences play out right now in places like Washington State and Colorado, where marijuana use has only been legal for just a few years. Here's an example from the Denver Post, citing stats from the region's Federal High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Unit. It noted that in 2014, when retail marijuana businesses began operating, in just 1 year, quote, marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 32%. Almost 20% of all traffic deaths were marijuana-related, compared to only 10% less than 5 years ago. Marijuana-related emergency departments visits increased 29%. Marijuana-related hospitalizations increased 38%. And marijuana-related calls to the Rocky Mountain Poison Center increased 72%, end quote. So, with all the challenges we face in California, from homelessness, high dropout rates, high rates of violence, to high rates of child neglect cases, is it really wise to compound our social problems by normalizing a mind-altering drug for recreational use? Now, here's a very relevant news clip on this subject.
Dangers of driving while high on marijuana and how unreliable the tests are to determine whether a driver is actually impaired. Nationwide, more than half the drivers rushed to trauma centers after traffic accidents have drugs in their system, usually pot, and fatal crashes are on the rise. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
They are the faces of lives cut short by other drivers who were high. Rosemary Temple, Tanya and Adrian Guevara, and Brian Wood, whose father is now the driving force behind DUID for drugs.
It turns out that the most common drug that we find is marijuana, usually in combination with many other drugs.
Today, 20 states allow medicinal marijuana. 4 states plus D.C. allow recreational pot.
Were you smoking in the car? Yeah.
In at least 2 states that have legalized marijuana, a disturbing trend. In Colorado, pot makes up 19% of all DUIs. Fatal accidents in which a driver had marijuana in his or her system, up 44%. In Washington state, that rate more than doubled, according to AAA. Among the victims, 23-year-old Blake Gaston.
You are impaired. You are impaired. I have seen impairment. I have seen what impairment does.
Blake was hit and killed while riding his motorcycle by a driver now in prison who admitted he was high. Under pressure, 6 states have recently passed new DUI laws for marijuana.
And now we will hear from Dr. Philip Drum as he is interviewed by Dr. Lynn Fox.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Fox, and I'm a researcher, an educator, and a concerned citizen looking at the various issues about marijuana and whether or not it should be legalized, and the effects on not only youth but adults and our society. And today, Dr. Philip Drum is here, and he's going to tell us some more, more sophisticated information about marijuana and whether or not it is medical, and some other things he has to share with us. So, Phil?
Hi, I'm here today. I'm with a group called Citizens Against Legalizing Marijuana, and a few other groups, the Smart Approaches to Marijuana group as well. And I have concerns about medical marijuana and what people call medical marijuana.
And what are they?
Well, they're medications that actually, medical marijuana in my books are those drugs that have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and they've been around since 1985. The Food and Drug and FDA in our country has approved products that are not marijuana. They're actually Delta-9 THC, the active component in marijuana. And so the drug name is actually called dronabinol, also known as Marinol, and it's been around so long that it's now generic.
Oh my God.
And there's also other products that came available at the same time in 1985. They were used for the nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy. They were also being used at that time in the mid-'80s for those patients that had HIV, that had the AIDS wasting syndrome. Mm-hmm. So when the marijuana industry picked up the issue of making marijuana from a medicinal standpoint, they used those cases of those FDA-approved products since the mid-'80s. And so the interesting thing about those products as well is since those products became available, they've actually been not well used. And that's why I think the public did not see them used very much prior to them voting for the Compassionate Use Act here in California. So what happened in the early 90s is we came out with the serotonin antagonist group of drugs that worked against nausea and vomiting. So marijuana or Marinol fell down even more on the list because that group of drugs actually revolutionized how we treat nausea and vomiting. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that know people that have undergone chemotherapy that do not have nausea and vomiting anymore because of the drugs that we've now had since the mid-'80s, since the Marinol was available, that have now revolutionized nausea and vomiting. Also in the mid-'90s, we also came out with another class of drugs to treat HIV. I'm sure many people know Magic Johnson and know that Magic Johnson's had HIV since the early 90s. Well, in the mid-'90s, a class of drugs called the protease inhibitors came out, and that really revolutionized how we treat HIV patients. So we really don't see those patients anymore that have that AIDS wasting syndrome. So again, another reason for the medicinal marijuana to not even be needed, because we're actually treating the AIDS syndromes with these new classes of drugs that are really kind of making it a lifelong disease.
Mm-hmm. So in reality, we already have the medicine. It's approved by research, a lot of research and a lot of years to show it's effective. And not only the benefits, but we understand the side effects. But with the so-called medical marijuana that you can basically go in to any dispensary, pay $20 or $40 to purchase, there are no stipulations, restrictions, information about the potency or how it was produced or any of that, but yet it's called medical marijuana.
That's true.
Is that right? So
That's
we
true.
already have something that works,
that's
that
FDA
we can
approved.
Trust.
Yeah, that we can trust, that is free of pesticides, free of molds, the things that are found in these medical products that are completely unregulated. Even if they do try to regulate them, they're going to have to try and remove these products, the pesticides and herbicides and other things that are in these products. Those are not in the FDA approved products already. Those FDA-approved products have undergone the rigors of the Food and Drug Administration. And also, just to add, the largest strength that we have available of Marinol is 10 milligrams.
Wow.
So dronabinol is available as 2.5, 5, and 10 milligrams. The largest size for medicinal marijuana, the true medical marijuana, is 10 milligrams. Yet we see, the dank grasshopper bar that has 420 milligrams of THC. That's really...
And the effect on the brain, the body, the immune system, all
right.
of those kind of things. They're not telling you about any of that, are they?
No, they're not. And they're not, who could really tolerate a 420 milligram dose? I mean, clearly not your first time naive patient. It really has to be an addict to take that type of product.
Phil, how did you get into this area? I know you're a pharmacist and a very brilliant one. And not only that, you're an excellent researcher. But what caused you to kind of step away from your profession and to become a volunteer and a speaker in this area? So could you share that with us?
Okay, well, thanks for asking. It really had to do with a set of extremely unfortunate circumstances. My sister was murdered by a driver under the influence of marijuana in Seattle, Washington. This happened on July 17th, 2012, in which she was driving to work. My sister was a nurse working at a hospital in downtown Seattle and was traveling into Seattle during a normal morning rush hour commute. And coming in the opposite direction was a person that was high on marijuana and slammed into her head on. Proceeded to tumble down the road, and his two front wheels came off the car and smashed into 8 other cars, causing an 8-car pileup. He was taken into the hospital where my sister was pronounced dead, and he was interviewed by the police. He admitted to using marijuana a week before, yet his blood level came back at 3.2 nanograms of THC 3 hours and 13 minutes later. Also, when they uprighted his car, marijuana and marijuana dispensary cards fell out of his car right in front of the police detective. So they knew right early on that marijuana was involved in my sister's death. They didn't file charges, though, curiously, until November 5th, which was one day before November 6th election in the state of Washington when they legalized their marijuana. So we unfortunately were not able to go to the media to warn the media and the public of the consequences of marijuana and driving in the state of Washington. We also actually weren't even told by the police that marijuana was involved. We found out through an insurance company that marijuana was involved. Okay, I just wanted to also add that the day that he murdered my sister, the defendant, all he had was a broken fingernail. And that night he walked home to his family and left the hospital while my dead sister was laying there in the hospital.
So was he arrested?
No, he wasn't arrested at all. In fact, they were supposed to go and arrest him at his court hearing for beating his wife. And we were called and told that the sheriff arrived too late to arrest him. And so my then 83-year-old mother asked, don't they know where he lives? That they can go and arrest him at his house? But no, they didn't even do that. And so when it came for the day of the arraignment, the first face I saw when the doors opened on the courtroom floor was his, sitting right in front of me on the courtroom floor. He then came into the courtroom and sat behind me with a couple of children who I later found out, kids that were probably less than 10 years old. He had sitting with him, who I later learned they were props. They weren't even his kids that he brought with him, so that he could tell the judge that he's a family man and has his kids out here with him.
Very sad story.
He was also working on the transit system there in Seattle, Washington, that they were building from their airport into the city.
Oh my God.
A known marijuana user was building their transit system in Seattle.
So it sounds like you could tell us a lot about driving under the influence and some of the effects that it has on the driver, the brain and the THC content and that type of thing. Could you exaggerate or, expand that information?
Sure. And so some of the information that I had was elicited by the driver that killed my sister. Not really understanding your surrounding as to where he was. He was driving down a center turn lane. The car, people like to say that you drive slow. In reality, people drive fast or are unaware of how fast they're going when they're under the influence of marijuana. And that was seen in him. He was driving 48 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. The car in front of him was going too slow for him. So he got into the center turn lane, proceeded to drive 400 feet. That's the entire length of a football field, plus the end zone, at 48 miles an hour in a 35. And at the last second realized he was driving right towards a vehicle that was legally stopped in that center turn lane, attempting to make a left-hand turn. So after driving 400 feet, he realized where he was. Again, something that we see with marijuana, them not understanding their circumstances and surroundings. He then drifted and pulled into the left instead of pulling back to the right and being in the correct lane he should have been in. When he pulled to the left, he pulled right into my sister, going 48 with her going 35 in the opposite direction. He would have caused a lot less damage had he run into the vehicle that was parked as compared to going into my sister going 35 in the opposite direction.
Now I understand that other cars were involved in this. 8 other cars.
8
What
other
was the
cars. There were a
situation?
total a number of 8 cars. He lost his front wheels, tumbled down the road, and actually there was an assault victim in the case that had her arm broken and her teeth broken out. And as soon as he crawled out of the roof of his vehicle, it was on its side, it had lost its wheels. He crawled out and he immediately then started pointing to my sister's car saying, "She caused the incident."
Oh my God.
So again, he left with just a broken fingernail out of all this.